Last semester, we spent our time together unpacking Jesus' words in John 15. Here's what he says. He says, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love." And we talked about the idea that Christianity, our faith in Jesus, is all about us entering and remaining in this relationship that he's given us. But Jesus doesn't just tell us to remain in relationship with him. He actually tells us how to do that. He says, "If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands. Now remain in his love." And so we have this idea of obeying Jesus, of putting his commands into practice. And we ended the semester talking about, how do we do that? And I think one of the best places to start is something Jesus says in Matthew 11. He says, "Hey, if you're weary, if you're burdened, come to me. Take my yoke on you." See, my yoke is easy and it's light. And we talked about how the idea of a yoke is this farming tool that you take two oxen and you put this wooden beam across their backs. And now all of a sudden these two oxen are moving together. And then they can pull really heavy farming equipment that one ox wouldn't be able to carry on their own. That's the language Jesus is using. He's saying, hey, connect yourself to me. Connect your life to my life. That is how we're supposed to live in the kingdom. It's not that we're supposed to live on our own. It's not supposed to be that we choose what's best for our life. Try to do it in our own power. When we yoke our lives to Jesus, what we actually say is, your way's best, and your way of living is the way that I'm going to live my life. And not only that, but I'm actually going to rely on your power through the Holy Spirit's presence in our lives to be able to do that. The idea of yoking ourselves to Jesus is anything but the idea of having a ball and chain connected to our ankles holding us back, right? The idea of yoking ourselves to Jesus is actually that we find a better way to live, and we find the power to be able to live it. So this semester, we want to talk about 3 practices that will enable us to take on Jesus' yoke in our lives. And the first one is prayer. So part of taking on Jesus' yoke is that we look at his life and we imitate it. We look at his teachings and we put those things into practice. And there's very few things that Jesus taught on. There's very few things that he modeled in his life more than prayer. Pretty much from the beginning of his teachings. In Matthew 6, Jesus says, when you pray, and he tells the people who were following him, he tells his close disciples who were right there with him, how they should pray, even what they should pray. And then later on in that teaching, he says this, ask, seek, and knock. Because those who ask, receive. Those who seek, find. Those who knock, the door is going to be open for them. Jesus taught about prayer because it seems like prayer is one of the fuels that makes the life of Jesus go. The ministry that he had. Just the personal relationship with God that he engaged in. Prayer was intertwined into it all. And he gives us that secret for us to be able to have that same kind of power in life and in the ministry that we have, just in the way that we live. Jesus' brother, his half-brother, James, he also says something about prayer. He says, if anyone's in trouble, he should pray. If anyone's sick, he should call other people to pray for him, because the prayer of the righteous person offered in faith is powerful and effective. That the solution to the problems that we have in life are going to be found as we go to God in prayer. And then Paul says something about prayer that this might be my favorite thought. Outside of Jesus' teachings on prayer, he says this, rejoice always, pray continuously, and in everything give thanks to God. So those 2 words, rejoice and give thanks, it makes it seem like everything's great. But sandwiched in between those 2 ideas is this thought from Paul, pray continuously. And I think actually most of life is probably lived in that middle section where there's so much that we need God to do for us, in us. And Paul's like, hey, the way for you to be able to rejoice, the way for you to be able to give thanks is to live a life of continuous prayer. That's God's will for your life, is that you would pray continually. How do we take on the yoke of Jesus? We create a life where we're devoted to prayer, where prayer is our first response, it's our continuous response, and it's really our last and only option. Because we know that that's the way for us to experience relationship with God, and that's the way for us to be able to be empowered to live the life that He has for us.